Hey folks, I'm making this video a little bit later than I normally do. I just stumbled across a story from about a high school up here in Canada, in Alberta, where some of the students got together and formed a group, at least on social media, called the White Students Alliance. And in it, in their posts, they are telling the world that they're ready and they are prepared, and they think it's time that they stand up to counteract the black supremacy that they are enduring. And they want to stand up against things like the anti-white curriculum that's being forced on them. They want to stand up against the society that they feel they are living in that is dominated by victimhood. That they want to stand up for their rights as white people. That they're tired of feeling the oppression they feel. Now, there's 3 points that I want to make about this. The first two are not very theological at all, just arguments to counter their notions. The first point they make is that they live in a society that's dominated by victimhood. For those of you that are out there that feel that that's the case, our society absolutely is different than what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Things are changing exponentially. But we're not in a society that is dominated by victimhood. We're in a society where those who have been harmed and injured by others or by the system we live in are finally feeling that they are able to start telling their story. They are finally beginning to feel as though it is safe for them to tell their story. And we live in a world where the platform for people to tell their story now reaches millions and millions of eyes and ears in a heartbeat. We're not in a world where we are dominated by victimhood. We live in a world where those who have been harmed, those who have been oppressed, those who have been injured are finally beginning to feel like it's safe for them to share their story, for them to open their mouths, to let their voice be heard. The second thing was their idea of an anti-white curriculum. They're tired of an anti-white curriculum because they're forced to sit through classes where they are learning about the evils of white people and how all white people are evil, and they're obviously they're studying African history. They're studying the history of the indigenous peoples. The truth is, here in Canada, and I will make this about Canada. You can, wherever you are, you can apply or discard this as you choose. Here in Canada, for me growing up, we learned all the glorious history of the colonizers, of those people who came to Canada, those people of non-Indigenous descent who came to Canada mainly from Europe, and how they grew this country. We hear about them arriving, we hear about them exploring, we hear about them discovering this land, exploring it, we hear about them making treaties with the indigenous populations and the indigenous nations that they come across, the indigenous peoples that they come across. And then we hear about them forming a new great nation out of this place. And as that new nation is formed, the indigenous voice, the indigenous stories, just sort of fade into the background. And unless the indigenous story fits in with our glorious memory, they're never heard from again. We hear about the Fathers of Confederation, but in school we never heard about how they broke the treaties, how they created residential schools. We hear about going to war, and when people of color or Indigenous people stand out, we might hear their story, but only in the context of how it benefited us. The truth is, especially when it comes to history, any accurate account of Canadian history, and those colonizers that we learned about, we see that they have blood on their hands. Any accurate account of Canadian history is the story of extreme, brutal violence and theft. That's how it began. It wasn't glorious partnerships. It was theft. It was lies. It was broken promises and broken contracts. And it was violent. This isn't anti-white. It's reality. It's the story of what really happened. We came, we stole or we conquered, we murdered, we pushed, we repressed, we committed a genocide. And then we tell the story from our perspective. There is no anti-white curriculum. The curriculum that's being taught shows us in the true light. The last thing I want to share about this story is, as I was reading the post, something occurred to me. These youth, these teenagers, these young adults, these words that they're sharing, these sentiments that they're offering, it's absolutely based in fear. But it's not their words. It's not their fear. This is what they're being taught. This is what somebody has taught them. This is what their parents have taught them, their grandparents have taught them, their mentors have taught them. This is what those voices that you and I all know whose voice they are, by the way, that those voices out there in the media streams are sharing with them. This idea of reverse racism, of white oppression. These aren't the words of teenagers. These are the words of those who are teaching the teenagers. Proverbs 22 came to mind. 22:6. Train up a child in the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not depart from it. What we share with our children matters. They absorb it like a sponge. They regurgitate it. They take it as gospel because it's coming from trusted sources. They adopt it and accept it as their own. What we're seeing out of this school is not the white supremacist attitude of teenagers. It is the reflection of the white supremacist attitude of the adults they are gathering their information from. It's another example of why all of us must be so incredibly careful as we share what it is we believe. We must share love. We must share mercy. We must share compassion. We must share courage. We must withhold hate. We must withhold our fear. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you, and may you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that you and I are able to speak affirming words, loving words, compassionate words, merciful words, challenging words to our children and to those children that are in our presence, so that as they grow, they'll be the leaders we hope they will be. Amen.